When all were completed, and full expiation made for the death of his wife and children, he would seem to have earned ease and tranquillity for the rest of his life. But it was not so. He was never tranquil and at ease. An exploit quite as difficult as most of the labors was the conquest of Antaeus, a giant and a mighty wrestler, who forced strangers to wrestle with him on condition that if he was victor, he should kill them. He was roofing a temple with skulls of his victims. As long as he could touch the earth, he was invincible. If thrown to the ground, he sprung up with renewed strength from the contact. Hercules lifted him up, and holding him in the air, strangled him. Story after story is told of his adventures. He fought the river entity Achelous because Achelous was in love with the girl Hercules now wanted to marry. Like everyone else by this time, Achelous had no desire to fight him, and he tried to reason with him. But that never worked with Hercules. If it only made him more angry. He said, "My hand is better than my tongue. Let me win fighting, and you may win talking." Achelous took the form of a bull and attacked him fiercely. But Hercules was used to subduing bulls. He conquered him and broke off one of his horns. The cause of the contest, a young princess named Deianira became his wife. Now, the Y in Greek would be really a or with the O in front of it, the EI. I mean, those aren't the Greek names for the letters, but to make it easy, would make the I sound. But typically in what we've been reading, I've been saying the Y because that's how people tend to say it. So if you were looking at Greek characters for all of this, sometimes the spelling's a little bit off. So I mean, in Latin versus Greek. So, well, not off, but you know what I mean. It's not the same. So he traveled to many lands and did many other great deeds. At Troy, he rescued a maiden who was in the same plight as Andromeda, waiting on the shore to be devoured by a sea monster which could be appeased in no other way. She was the daughter of King Laomedon, who had cheated Apollo and Poseidon of their wages after, at Zeus's command, they had built for the king the walls of Troy. In return, Apollo sent a pestilence, and Poseidon, the sea serpent, Hercules agreed to rescue the girl if her father would give him the horses Zeus had given his grandfather. Laomedon promised, but when Hercules had slain the monster and the king refused to pay, Hercules captured the city, killed the king, and gave the maiden to his friend, Telamon of Salamis, who had helped him. On his way to Atlas to ask him about the golden apples, Hercules came to the Caucasus, where he freed Prometheus, slaying the eagle that preyed on him. Along with these glorious deeds, there were others not glorious. He killed, with a careless thrust of his arm, a lad who was serving him by pouring water on his hands before a feast. It was an accident, and the boy's father forgave Hercules, but Hercules could not forgive himself, and he went into exile for a time. Far worse was his deliberately slaying a good friend in order to avenge an insult offered him by the young man's father, King Eurytus. For this base action, Zeus himself punished him. He sent him to Lydia to be a slave to the queen Othello. Some say for a year, some for 3 years. She amused herself with him, making him at times dress up as a woman and do women's work, weave or spin. He submitted patiently as always, but he felt himself degraded by this servitude, and with complete unreason blamed Eurytus for it, and swore he would punish him to the utmost when he was freed. All the stories told about him are characteristic. but the one which gives the clearest picture of him is the account of a visit he made when he was on his way to get the man-eating mares of Diomedes, one of the 12 laborers, the house he had planned to spend a night in, that of his friend Admetus, a king in Thessaly, was a place of deep mourning when he came to it, although he did not know. Admetus had just lost his wife in a very strange way. The cause of her death went back into the past to the time when Apollo, in anger at Zeus for killing his son Asclepius, killed Zeus's workman, the Cyclops. He was punished by being forced to serve on Earth as a slave for a year, and Admetus was the master he chose, or Zeus chose for him. During his servitude, Apollo made friends with the household, especially with the head of it, and his wife, Alcestis. When he had the opportunity to prove how strong his friendship was, he took it. He learned that the three fates had spun all of Admetus's thread of life, and were on the point of cutting it. He obtained from them a respite. If someone would die in Admetus's stead, he could live. The news he took to Admetus, who at once set about finding a substitute for himself. He went first, quite confidently, to his father and mother. They were old, and they were devoted to him. Certainly one or the other would consent to take his place in the world of the dead, but his astonishment he found they would not. They told him, "God's daylight is sweet even to the old. We do not ask you to die for us. We will not die for you." And they were completely unmoved by his angry contempt. You standing palsied at the gate of death, and yet afraid to die. He would not give up, however. He went to his friends, begging one after another of them to die and let him live. He evidently thought his life was so valuable that someone would surely save it, even at the cost of the supreme sacrifice. But he met with an invariable refusal. At last, in despair, he went back to his house, and there he found a substitute. His wife, Alcestis, offered to die for him. No one who has read so far will need to be told that he accepted the offer. He felt exceedingly sorry for her, and still more for himself in having to lose so good a wife, and he stood weeping beside her as she died. When she was gone, he was overwhelmed with grief and decreed that she should have the most magnificent of funerals. It was at this point that Hercules arrived to rest and enjoy himself under a friend's roof on his journey north to Diomedes. The way Admetus treated him shows more plainly than any other story we have how high the standards of hospitality were, how much was expected from a host to a guest. As soon as Admetus was told of Hercules' arrival, he came to meet him with no appearance of mourning except in his dress. His manner was that of one gladly welcoming a friend. To Hercules' question, who was dead, he answered quietly that a woman of his household, but no relative of his, was to be buried that day. Hercules instantly declared that he would not trouble him with his presence at such a time, but Admetus steadily refused to let him go elsewhere. "I will not have you sleep under another's roof," he told him. To his servants he said that the guest was to be taken to a distant room where he could hear no sounds of grief, and given dinner and lodging there. No one must let him know what had happened. Hercules dined alone, but he understood that Admetus must, as a matter of form, attend the funeral, and the fact did not stand in the way of his enjoying himself. The servants left at home to attend to him were kept busy satisfying his enormous appetite and still more refilling his wine jug. Hercules became very happy and very drunk and very noisy. He roared out songs at the top of his voice, some of them highly objectionable songs, and behaved himself in a way that was nothing less than indecent at the time of the funeral. I have a CD of funeral songs, and you don't need to play them loud, but some people play them loud. When the servants looked their disapproval, he shouted at them not to be so solemn. Could they give him a smile now and then, like good fellows, their gloomy faces took away his appetite. "Have a drink with me," he cried. "Many drinks." One of them answered timidly that it was not a time for laughter and drinking. "Why not?" thundered Hercules. "Because a stranger woman is dead?" "A stranger?" faltered the servant. "Well, that's what Admetus told us. Well, told me." Hercules said angrily, "I suppose you won't say he lied to me." "Oh, no," the servant answered. "Only he's too hospitable. But please have some more wine. Our trouble is only our own." He turned to fill the wine cup, but Hercules seized him, and no one ever disregarded that grasp. "There's something strange here," he said to the frightened man. "What is wrong?" "You see for yourself. We are in mourning," the other answered. "But why, man, why?" Hercules cried. "Has my host made a fool of me? Who is dead?" "Alcestis," the servant whispered. "Our queen." There was a long silence. Then Hercules threw down his cup. "I might have known," he said. "I saw he had been weeping. His eyes were red, but he swore it was a stranger. He made me come in. Oh, good friend and good host. And I got drunk, made merry in this house of sorrow. Oh, he should have told me." Well, generally a middle path anyways. And if you're better with your voice and following along with things, you don't have to be louder than people to hear you, to have the effect on yourself and others. And they don't if they know how to get into things. But a lot of spiritual communities don't really teach this anymore, so. Then he did as always. He heaped blame upon himself. He had been a fool, a drunken fool, when the man he cared for was crushed with grief. As always, too, his thoughts turned quickly to find some way of atoning. What could he do to make amends? There was nothing he could do. He was perfectly sure of that, but what was there which would help his friend? Then light dawned on him. Of course, he said to himself, this is the way. I must bring Alcestis back from the dead. Of course, nothing could be clearer. I'll find that old fellow, Death. He is sure to be near her tomb, and I'll wrestle with him. I will crack his body between my arms until he gives her to me. If he is not by the grave, I will go down to Hades after him. Oh, I will return good to my friend, who has been so good to me. He hurried out exceedingly pleased with himself and enjoying the prospect of what promised to be a very good wrestling match. When Admetus returned to his empty and desolate house, Hercules was there to greet him, and by his side was a woman. Look at her, Admetus, he said. Is she like anyone you know? And when Admetus cried out, A ghost! It is a trick! Is it a trick? Some mockery of the gods? Hercules answered, It is your wife. I fought death for her, and I made him give her back. There is no other story about Hercules which shows so clearly his character as the Greeks saw it, his simplicity and blundering stupidity, his inability not to get roaring drunk in a house where someone was dead, his quick penitence and desire to make amends, at no matter what cost, his perfect confidence that not even death was his match. That is the portrait of Hercules, to be sure. It would have been still more accurate if it had shown him, in a fit of rage, killing one of the servants who were annoying him with their gloomy faces. But the poet Euripides, from whom we get the story, kept it clear of everything that did not bear directly to Alcestis' death, and returned to life. Another death or two, however natural, when Hercules was present, would have blurred the picture he wanted to paint. So we see long before, well, this isn't all that long comparison, but we see before Christianity, the idea of humans becoming like, becoming like those considered gods and goddesses, dying and resurrecting as part of their hero deeds and going down into hell and all sorts of stuff. But the Bible says, whoa, these cleverly imagined stories full of meaning. They're literally true this time. Incarnate in our Lord Jesus Christ. Something like that, the verse goes. It's like, well, so thousands of, these sorts of stories, but, the one is true, is what they're trying to claim. As Hercules had sworn to do while he was at Omphale's while he was Omphale's slave, no sooner was he free than he started to punish King Eurytus, because he himself had been punished by Zeus for killing Eurytus' son. He collected an army, captured the king's city, and put him to death. But Eurytus, too, was avenged, for indirectly this victory was the cause of Hercules' own death. Before he'd quite completed the destruction of the city, he sent home where Deianira was his devoted wife, was waiting for him to come back from Omphale in Lydia, a band of captive maidens, one of them especially beautiful, Iole, the king's daughter. The man who brought them to Deianira told her that Hercules was madly in love with this princess. This news was not so hard for Deianira as might be expected, because she believed she had a powerful love charm, which she'd kept for years against such an evil. A woman in her own house preferred before her, directly after her marriage. When Hercules was taking her home, they had reached a river where the centaur Nessus acted as ferryman. Carrying travelers across the water, he took Deianira on his back, and in midstream insulted her. She shrieked, and Hercules shot the beast as he reached the other bank. Before he died, he told Deianira to take some of his blood and use it as a charm for Hercules if he ever loved another woman more than her. When she heard about Iole, it seemed to her the time had come, and she anointed a splendid robe with the blood and sent it to Hercules by the messenger. And one of the things that we find in this sort of stuff is that there's, they call it a fetish link. And blood and hair and all that, and, spit or other fluids or something from a person, people use it as a link, particularly when you're talking sihr, involving yourself with these entities they're calling gods and goddesses, right? But sometimes just a name connects you to the what's going on regarding to the dead, or walking through a cemetery or something. And this stuff doesn't have to be done in worship of one thing or another, but some things are kind of, yeah, so you don't have to engage in gross stuff or dangerous stuff like blood and all that, but as the hero put it on, the effect was the same as that of the robe Medea had sent her rival, whom Jason was about to marry. A fearful pain seized him, as though he were in a burning fire. In his first agony, he turned on Deianira's messenger, who was, of course, completely innocent, seized him and hurled him down into the sea. He could still slay others, but it seemed that he himself could not die. The anguish he felt hardly weakened him. What had instantly killed the young princess of Corinth could not kill Hercules. He was in torture, but he lived, and they brought him home. Long before Deianira had heard what her gift had done to him and had killed herself. In the end, he did the same, since death would not come to him. He would go to death. He ordered those around him to build a great pyre on Mount Oeta and carry him to it. When at last he reached it, he knew that he now could die, and he was glad. This is rest, he said. This is the end. And they lifted him to the pyre. He lay down on it, as one who at a banquet table lies down upon his couch. He asked his youthful follower, Philoctetes, to hold the torch, to set the wood on fire, and he gave him his bow and arrows, which were to be far famed in the young man's hands, too, at Troy. Then the flames rushed up, and Hercules was seen no more on earth. He was taken to heaven, where he was reconciled to Hera, and married her daughter, Hebe. Doesn't Hebe mean like adolescent or something? And where, after his mighty labors, he had rest, his choicest prize, eternal peace, within the homes of blessedness. But it is not easy to imagine him contentedly enjoying rest and peace, or allowing the blessed entities to do so either. It might also mean like adult, but not old enough to have wrinkles. Some languages have words like that for like 13, 15, whatever, to like 25, 26, something. Actually, that's probably the most common thing, rather than more specific things. Every couple years or something, you get a new age for what, type of male or female you are or something.